Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here with the happy task of looking back at that offensive performance against the Texans in the divisional round. Made all the happier by Gordon McGinnis of PFF joining us for this game. Gordon, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you for having me.
Now, cold game this time. I thought we'd start out with that because you being from the UK, you're no stranger to cold weather, to high winds, to some rain, as you would describe it. But in terms of your experiences, you came over for the Mile High Miracle game in 2012, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Tell us a little bit about your experience and prep for that game.
So my prep for it probably stemmed from I was at the AFC Championship game the year before when they lost on the Billy Cundiff miss. And I showed up for that. I had like a pair of purple Converse sneakers, shoes, whatever you want to call them. And couldn't feel the back half of my feet by the end of that game. So my mom got me a gift of like a pair of like really sturdy walking boots that I still have to this day, ahead of going to the next one. But Denver was like a different level of cold. Both of those, like, we get cold weather over here. The cold I experienced at both of those games is unlike anything I've experienced at a sporting event here in Scotland. All
right. So you guys play football, proper football, all the way through the winter, right? Over there?
Yeah, we take like a very small break here in Scotland for like a week and a half. But it's, there's not really much stoppage. That's more just, I think, because we tend to get like a bit of extra rain and stuff around this time as well.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. I'm glad it didn't completely ruin the Mile High Miracle for you, but that was the first game where I've really been on the verge of frostbite. So we had not. Let me think about this now. Yes, we had learned the trick about standing on cardboard already, but we hadn't moved over to the insulation, which is now what I use. By the way, we took the squares of insulation. I've had them out there on Twitter the last couple of days. So if you're listening to this show, you almost certainly have seen me doing that. I sat down on a piece of insulation for the whole game, no problem. With 2 minutes to go, I pulled it out and Maureen put it back in the bag so we could take it home and use it for the next game. I sat back down on the seat. I'm sitting on a frozen rock all of a sudden. It's a complete difference in terms of the feel, and you immediately feel it through 4 layers of clothing. So anyway, enough of that. We've got a great football team we're currently rooting on it. DVOA has come out today with a weighted DVOA number that puts the Ravens at the very head of the class of their 40-year history in terms of through the divisional round. The 85 Bears, in terms of weighted DVOA, may have finished up better because they certainly finished that postseason well. But how have you started to go through the process of ranking this team among the great teams you've ever seen, Gordon?
Not officially. Like, I've kind of done it in my head. I had someone ask me at the weekend, like, how I compare it to previous Ravens teams, which I always think is funny because the defensive team in 2000, I think that obviously historic. But the 2012 team, there's probably 3, maybe 4 teams, Ravens teams, that are more deserving of winning a Super Bowl. And that's, single elimination in the NFL just throws those things out of there. But this definitely is the best. If you include like how good the offense is, you could make that a pretty strong case that it's the most complete team they've ever had. And I think you can say that pretty comfortably. So you factor in that the schematically they're very good on both sides of the ball, especially in defense, and then you add in the fact that you have a soon-to-be 2-time MVP playing quarterback. So it just makes it a very different proposition from previous teams.
Yeah, exciting. Certainly, there's the Ravens are in rarefied air right now. We need to appreciate this 2-game stretch we're facing. And Gordon, I know you got a lot riding on this AFC Championship game, and it's not all money.
No, in fact, I'll get onto the money side afterwards. But yeah, I'm going to be in attendance in Las Vegas. Last year I got to go for the week. At PFF, we only got 1 spot at the game, which I assigned to Sam Monson. This year we got 2. And I did a lot more writing this year. So it's me and Sam that are going to be in the stadium. So it means that for the first time I get to go and see the Super Bowl live in person. If the Ravens win this week, I'll get to see them play, which would be great because the game against Tennessee in London this year was the first football game I'd been to since, I think, the Mile High Miracle.
Wow.
So to get to two Ravens games in the one season would be very nice. But on the money side of things, I am a very strong believer in emotional hedging. So I have wagered on the opposite side of that, so that I will still be incredibly disappointed if the Ravens don't win. I will at least have some sort of softening blow to make my trip to Las Vegas a little bit better.
Okay, so you're betting on the game only, the Chiefs.
Yes.
To beat the Ravens, and so you're taking the 3.5. Boy, I don't like that bet. I really don't like that bet. It seems incredibly low to me considering the thing. But you're emotional hedging. You're paying for, it's like buying insurance.
Exactly. I just want something that makes it not the worst thing that's happened in my sporting life should it happen.
Well, I think a lot of Baltimore fans are going to feel like it is. I think the fact that it's Patrick Mahomes and not Tannehill that's knocking him out of the playoffs, or the Titans in general with a physical team coming in 2019 and doing it, or that 2006 Colts team, even though that was a Manning team and they went to the Super Bowl and beat the Bears, right? That they beat the Bears that year, yeah. And those two losses, they'll always have a place in Ravens history in terms of thinking back about the bad times. But for you, has this last game, did it exercise a lot of those 2019 demons?
Yeah, it definitely did. And it's not, I think pretty much everyone watching that game would have had some level of nerves when the punt return happened, because it felt a little bit like, and then, what followed right before the half with the pressure that got to Lamar, a little bit like, okay, here we go. This is what we've seen before. And I also find this not just from the team perspective, but I feel so emotionally invested in Lamar Jackson because he was the 32nd overall pick, and all the outside noise and what everyone said about him in his career, most of which is complete nonsense. But I feel almost this like protective sense of just wanting him to have success to shut those people up. And I was talking to a friend before, like in the lead up to the game, and not a Ravens fan, but he said, like, I just want to see Lamar go out there and have like a huge game. And I was like, yeah, it's exactly what I want. So that was a very nice part of it, I think, was the fact to exercise those demons in that sense as well.
Now, let me actually ask you a difficult question on this, because as a PFF, you're the head of content at PFF. Now, I know that makes you a little bit separate from the grading people directly in terms of that. But do you think PFF has a role that they played in the non-recognition of Lamar's value? Because whether you're talking to Eric Eager or Tima Riska or whoever you talk to, they'll all tell you they cannot fully recognize Lamar's value within the grading system as it stands now.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if we have a role to play in that, or if it is that's just naturally kind of the way people are. But I definitely think the grading system, because it's not a quarterback specific thing, but because a lot of the things like linebacker play, for example, in coverage, it's target based. So it's not, and we do stuff behind the scenes. It's just not built into the grading based on certain things that we're not able to do. Like a lot of the kind of target based nature of that stuff means that the grades are more of a kind of like active grade rather than things that are happening around about. And for 99% of the quarterbacks in the NFL, and probably 90% of quarterback snaps in the NFL, those kind of within the parameters of quarterback play sum everything up perfectly. But there are, for most quarterbacks, a handful of plays that are kind of out with that, where it's the intangibles, it's the, avoiding pressure and, finding that dump off that goes a certain distance. And for Lamar, a lot of it is just, you can't quantify the impact he has on the defensive scheme. The extra pressure, you have to focus on that. And it's, we'll talk about Lamar as a runner later on. Him and Josh Allen are both really good runners at the quarterback position, but Josh Allen is a very good runner who is tough to tackle. Lamar Jackson is someone who you have to build your defensive scheme around the fact that he can run, which is a very different proposition, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great. It is something. If you're looking at all of the contributions that PFF has made to the analysis of football, I think the biggest contributions are in grading offensive linemen, where honestly the regressive nature of media viewing of offensive line was just based on who went to the Pro Bowl last year, who was. Anyway, all of that stuff and all of the 7, 8, 9 consecutive All-Pro seasons that people had at various positions, it's not even really there. Linebacker, a lot of the defensive spots, just they didn't make a lot of sense. And today they wouldn't happen because PFF would grade players down for, you'd have be more understood the week-to-week variation in play and certainly the season-to-season variation in play, particularly due to injuries. And I think that's been a great thing. I think Marshall Yanda will be one of the first guys to go into the Hall of Fame that is truly a PFF product of PFF getting him there. So I don't know that he would have done it without it. I think he probably needed constant reminders on a weekly basis from PFF grading that he belongs there.
The big thing for offensive linemen, I remember this was one of the first things Neil Hornsby told me about it, and it was that he would find that offensive linemen who were first round picks were pretty much guaranteed to be voted in as Pro Bowlers because there was just this assumption that, I don't know much about offensive linemen, so this guy went in the first round, he must be good. And he even found anecdotal stuff like guys that had longer hair, that had like a flowing blonde mane out the back, or that had dreadlocks coming out the back of the helmet. It would make them more noticeable, and those guys would get voted into the Pro Bowl and things like that more often. So, and I think one of the things I'm probably most proud of being at PFF on the Marshall Yanda discussion is I love that we can have a discussion about not only he is a Hall of Fame offensive lineman, but we can actually point to a season and say, if he'd stuck at right tackle for his entire career, that would have probably still been the case.
Yep. Certainly a remarkable year for him at right tackle that year. And, the fact that PFF was around meant a lot of national media were actually picking up on the fact that he'd had a great year. I don't remember who it was who specifically pointed
I think
that
it was
out.
Peter King. I think Peter King had him. I think Peter King had him as his all-pro right tackle or something like that year.
Yeah. Well, great stuff, certainly. Let's talk about the offensive line quickly here since we're there. One of the best games I thought they had collectively. I didn't think Simpson had a particularly good game, but other than that, I thought they played pretty well across the board. And certainly having Stanley and Moses come together with the 2 games they had here, really great timing.
Yeah, I definitely think this was the best they'd looked as a unit, at least as far as I can remember this season. And Stanley had, I think, his best game of the year so far. So Good all around.
Yeah, pretty easy call there, I'd say. The other thing that is talked about a lot in terms of this game is the halftime adjustments. And there's certain things I noticed in terms of the second half and the ball out quickly on those first couple of plays in particular. But there's some stats that really back that up in terms of the first half versus second half differentiation. What do you think was the biggest adjustment maybe on each side of the ball that you saw in the second half?
Yeah, the big thing was how quickly they got out the ball. I looked at this on Sunday morning because it felt pretty extreme while watching the game live. But the first half, they averaged 3.9 seconds time to throw, which that includes time to scramble and also time to sack. And 83.3% of their dropbacks were 2.6 seconds or higher. That number dropped to 36% in the second half, and the average was 2.5. And it felt so much more in rhythm in the second half. And then I don't know. Wouldn't necessarily say I'd picked up on any massive defensive adjustment in the second half, but I just think overall it was a tremendous defensive performance whereby I said to someone on Sunday or Monday, I can't remember which now because, must have been Sunday because it wasn't today. All days kind of blend into one until we get through the end of the football season. I think that's probably the best defensive performance that I can remember. And this is a hell of a caveat to have in a game where a team didn't have a sack and didn't force a turnover.
I've looked back for that exact same question because it came up from a reader, and the 2000 team didn't have any such game. And they only had 30 some sacks. They only had 2 where they didn't have a sack, and they had turnovers all over the place. So, those 2 games were slathered with like 3 and 1, I believe. And this team has not had a game without a sack until this one. So there's the number of games like that are so rare. I think that's one of those comments that almost has a charlatan-like quality to it, that if somebody thinks, wow, that's an incredible. Well, it's 6 games or something. And, this is a game where they gave up 3 defensive points. Fantastic game, though.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't mean to call you a charlatan there. It's just
no.
It's the best kind of charlatanry.
Yeah, it is such an extreme caveat to put on something, because generally those 2 things are very key to good defensive performances.
Now, Buffalo and Kansas City. So we're going into Sunday night. Who were you looking for? Who did you want to play in Baltimore?
Ever so slightly, the Chiefs. And I think probably like 51% to 49. So I think it's still going to be an incredibly tough test. But the one thing I thought watching the game, of all the things this defense has faced all year, I don't know that they've faced a quarterback who could give them problems in the running game like Josh Allen could. They also run a lot more gap runs with James Cook. And that's where the Ravens defense has struggled a little bit more this year, I think. So the combination of that just made me a little bit wary of, they have plays where they're going to be able to cover people for a good amount of time. Josh Allen's going to be someone who can break free from pressure and can, scramble up the middle, and very tough to bring down. So that gave the slight edge. I will say, as soon as the game ended, I was immediately nervous, because I think Patrick Mahomes has strung together a pair of pretty incredible games, and is just not making mistakes. So it certainly is by no means an easy proposition.
He's through the road game. Now, the game is not all about Patrick Mahomes. Certainly, if it's about Taylor Swift now, which I'm not very happy about, but it's also the offensive line for the Chiefs now, maybe without Joe Thuney. Do you have an update on that?
No, the last I saw was he was going for an MRI, which would be huge, because he's been one of the best pass blocking guards in football this year. So that would be a pretty big loss for them. Be
a 3-tech nightmare for the Chiefs going either way. Either way the Ravens may line it up, but certainly lots of good opportunities to bomb both those A gaps, both those B gaps. When you don't have good guards, you're in a lot of trouble. You're just in a lot of trouble. All right. So we talked a little bit about that. How about the secondary for the Chiefs? Obviously, the secondary for the Bills was one of the reasons to like the Bills in this game. And Rasul Douglas came back and played that game, but Benford was still sat out, and Bernard Harris, the linebacker, is still out. Now, do you know anything about Gay's injury and whether or not because he could be a significant spy force against Lamar?
Yeah, I haven't seen any updates on either of those injuries. I think the Chiefs' defense overall was much healthier, but I think they had 2 injuries. Was it Mike Edwards as well? I think his was a concussion. I think I heard while watching the game. So that'll be things to monitor kind of throughout the week.
All right. People haven't been coming back from concussions in 1 week nearly as often this year.
No,
but I have a feeling it's going to be different for an AFC Championship game.
Playoffs, I think, for as much as the NFL has put a focus on player safety, and I think you can be critical of the NFL for a lot. I think you probably have to commend some of the work they've done there. In the playoffs, players are going to push more to want to be playing. Teams are going to push more for them to be playing, and it gets a little bit harder to make sure those things happen.
Mm-hmm. All right. Some other things we need to talk about. The Ravens outsnapped Houston 67-47 in this game. I know there have been studies done, and I put that in air quotes, that show that it doesn't really matter if you outsnap your opponent. Your defense doesn't really benefit from it very much. You heard that said? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, especially up front, right? Like especially on the defensive line, on the interior, whereby if you, I don't know, maybe it's one of those things that it's like a cause and effect thing.
Yep.
That if you're being outsnapped, you're being run on more, so you're being tired up front because you're being run on more, rather than, it doesn't actually make your defense fresher and all those things. But to me, it doesn't really make a ton of sense.
It doesn't make any sense to me at all either. And one of the things, false causality comes up all the time in these kind of things, but there could be many different countercurrents. You've mentioned one possible, one that it could be, but it could be that the team that's losing snap count is also having to throw and have some. It could be a lot of things that could cause this thing to occur, and you're just losing the point there. The Ravens' red zone performance in this game, probably one of the biggest things to me. Obviously, the biggest thing, 0 out of 0 in the red zone for the Texans. Gotta love that.
Did I see correctly that the Texans didn't cross the Ravens' 25-yard line?
I believe that to be correct. Not a snap inside the 25.
That's an incredible statistic for a playoff game, especially given the fact that now I know anyone that follows the Ravens know that they were on a different level in the Cleveland Browns defense, and the Browns defense on the road was not the same as it was at home. But for Stroud to do what he did to the Browns defense and then the following week not be able to cross the Ravens 25-yard line it just highlights again just how good that performance was.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's really good also to see the Ravens themselves turn their own performance around the red zone. They've been kind of mediocre since the first 12 out of 15 start in the red zone through, I think that was about when they went to the game in London and they went 1 for 6. But they had not been outstanding for most of the season, other than that the first stretch and now this 4 to 5 in this game. It's absolutely terrific to see. Obviously, all of it is a lot better than the 44% last year, which had a lot of Tyler Huntley in there. To be fair, but what I thought was exceptional in this game was a lot of the run blocking in the red zone was just out of this world.
Yeah, the run blocking, and also it was a very Lamar focused red zone scheme. Mm-hmm. 3 of the touchdowns, the fake quarterback sweep with the toss to Likely, the 2 Lamar Jackson runs, it was all very focused on let's put the ball in number 8's hand and let him do his thing.
Series success rate, another thing that has gone well. We've been talking about this for a lot of the year, but they went 22 out of 28 every time, meaning every time they got a first down, they got a subsequent first down or touchdown 22 of 28 times. That's 78.6%. That would lead the league in most years. So, even though they certainly had their troubles in the first half moving the ball a little bit and had to punt on occasion, that overall number is outstanding. And I think one of the things that Houston fans are really talking about today and yesterday is how the Ravens could not be gotten off the field when they were on offense in that second half.
Yeah. Yep.
Ravens made their only 4th down attempt. I thought that was probably one of the biggest plays of the game. Did you like the call at the time? And then tell us a little bit about the play from your perspective.
I loved the call, and I loved the play design as well. I honestly thought they should have gone earlier in the game as well when they kicked the field goal. I get why they didn't, but the thing I really liked about going for it is that the Ravens have been one of the least aggressive teams in the league on 4th down this year. And I think it's for 2 reasons. I think it's important. 2 reasons why I think it's notable. One, I think there probably is a regression from the over-aggressive Ravens teams that we saw in previous years because it didn't work out for them quite a lot. And I think naturally, if it doesn't work out for you a lot, you're going to regress a little bit away from that just because I think that's human nature. The other part, though, is, and this is the part that every time I see someone tweet it and say, what happened to Harbaugh's Ravens, this Ravens team does not need to go for it on 4th down as much as they previously did. In the playoffs, maybe a little bit different, but they're building 14-point leads. They're heavy favorites. And maybe I'm not correct about this because I'm not 100% on everything when it comes to analytics, but the biggest thing for me when I think about analytics and going for it on 4th down, going for 2-point conversions, is that if you are the underdog, you're creating variance by doing that. And there's a reason you're the underdog. So the Ravens are not the underdog. So you actually don't want variance. You want to keep this game script going as normal. So if you fail, all of a sudden it's a short field. It's like a turnover. So that's why they're not going for it as much as previous teams.
This is a topic very near and dear to my heart. And most of the people, fans of this show, have been hearing me talk about all year, basically, that when you're the decidedly better team, you want to heap less variance into a few plays and take a gamble on that. I have currently a Wharton risk professor, Ben Baldwin, and other actuarial friends up my rear end telling me you can't think of it that way because each result is a 1 or a 0. And I'm thinking it's not the individual result, it's the sum of the results. When you know there's 4 or 5, 6 of these in a game, and they don't necessarily have to come down to decisions on going for it on downing distance. It could be other things about play selection and other things, but you're making a host of gambles that are involved in a football game. There is a distribution of those 6 outcomes, and you don't want one outcome to dominate all the others. And so I'm having a hard time kind of articulating this in mathematical terms, but I'll toss the people out there. There's other people who know a lot about math, and I'm a Howard in the math world because I'm just a plain actuary. It's a trade profession from that perspective in terms of really understanding mathematics. There's a lot of theoretical mathematicians who are way ahead of me. I would love to do one of two things. Either I get a mathematical proof that says that's the way it works, and I'll work my way through it. I'll try to understand it. Or I give you a counterexample that is robust in nature, and hopefully you either then have to rescript the nature of this, or at least admit that the counterexample that I give isn't really covered by the model. So that's where I think the thing is. But there's two sides of this. One could be rigorous proof, and the other thing could be counterexample. I think it has to be resolved that way. But right now, I agree with you completely, Gordon, in terms of what you've just said. It makes complete sense to me. And I think we see it in all through our society in things like insurance, in your emotional hedging. That is an example of us not wanting all of that risk heaped into one event. It permeates our society.
I did not place a bet on anyone the Ravens were playing against in the regular season because there was no real value in, it doesn't really help me massively on the flip side of it. But now both playoff games, the emotional side of it is devastating if they lose. So I've balanced that against something there. I also think, so the flip side of this and I'm not saying that we are definitely right on this. That's just where my opinion on it goes. But you often hear commentators talk about whether or not someone should go for 2 or go for it on 4th down. And they'll say, oh, but what? There was a quote this year, I think, during Monday Night Football, and I think it was Troy Aikman. And he said, what the analytics doesn't take into account is Drew Lock. And everyone thought it was hilarious because it was, this. Obviously, what it means is that you have a backup quarterback.
Yep.
I don't necessarily agree with that because when you have a backup quarterback, you are in the negative side of the thing. So creating more variance there actually probably does help you. But this is just one whereby if you are a strong, heavy favorite, I just don't think you need to create that additional variance. Now, maybe it is wrong, like in the sense that, last week the Ravens could have ran into the best that the Texans have played all year. So the spread effectively is wrong because the spread hasn't, figured out that the Texans are going to play the best they are. But I do think you just have to approach it from what is the information I have in front of me. And the information I have in front of me says we're 10 points better than that team. So I don't need to create this unless it's a situation whereby the risk is dropped a little bit and the benefit is even greater.
Well, completely agree. And it's interesting. You mentioned this. I wonder if this is a particularly British thing, but I've certainly heard of Americans doing it too. But people from the UK, your society, I have to describe this differently because you've got bookies on every corner, pretty much. So much of your economy runs through gambling. Relative to the United States, say, even where gambling is very prevalent now too, but it certainly is built up over about the last 30 years in terms of a lot of the Indian casinos and more states allowing gambling than just Nevada. But does this permeate thinking of a lot of people from the UK, do you think, as well?
I have a few friends who we would happily bet against the thing we want to happen in a high value situation. I've bet on the England men and women's football teams, soccer teams winning tournaments because as someone from Scotland, if they win a tournament, I'm going to have to hear about it for 4 years. So if I'm going to have to hear about it for 6 years, at least give me £500 to make it, soften the blow a little bit.
And you weren't born in 1966 yet, so you haven't gotten the payoff on that World Cup yet. Okay, I get it. All right, well, terrific. That's great stuff. Let's see. Let's look at the Ravens' overall run and pass. 42 run, 25 pass in this game. Some of it weather-driven, probably a little bit anyway, and some of it's script-driven, that the Ravens are just ready to get the game over with. I thought they did a marvelous job of jamming it right down their throats. As the game went on, obviously their yards per carry dropped off significantly in the second half. Once Cook got running the ball a little bit and had some of his negative plays and his other plays, it didn't work along with the one that did. But I thought, it's a very good sign when your offense can just pound the hell out of the team when they know it's coming.
Yeah, the whole game, it felt like they were going to be able to run the ball well. And I think to have a game where you rush for 229 yards, but you don't have the 50-yard run in there. It's just, the average might not have been where it was in the second half, but you're still churning out enough to get there. And that was what my big concern with the Ravens coming out in the playoffs was. Without Keaton Mitchell, there isn't the guy that turns, the 30-yard gain into a touchdown. I think a 40-yard run is probably where the Ravens running backs are probably capped at. I think even, and that's from like their own 20-yard line. It probably gets run down a little bit the other side of the field. But I mean, the difference a lot of the time is to not be overly simplistic. It's having Lamar Jackson at quarterback and putting linebackers in a bind, putting opposing defenses in a bind, and then having running backs that can barrel forwards. The idea, I talked to a friend about this during the game, being a linebacker in the NFL or being a box safety, and you're going up against the Ravens offense, and you have Lamar Jackson, who mentally must be just exhausting because you're having to watch him the whole time. And then they hand the ball off to Gus Edwards, who, if Gus Edwards gets 2 yards from his offensive line, he's getting 5 yards because he's getting the extra 3. He doesn't need a big run up. He just needs those 2 yards. So now all of a sudden, as a linebacker, I'm exhausted mentally. I'm getting exhausted physically because they just run straight at me and just barrel me over. It's not a fun position to play in the NFL these days when you're in that situation.
And you show any weakness, and they'll continue to run the ball at you. Obviously, whether it's mental or physical doesn't even matter. And it's something baseball players are often accused of. Sometimes is everybody looks like they don't want the ball hit to them. Well, in baseball, there's a lot more control from the pitcher and whatnot in terms of making that not actually happen, and some from the batter as well, obviously, and some from where players are positioned relative to the handedness of the batter, obviously. So all of that plays a role. But in football, you can't avoid. I mean, one thing that defensive coordinators will say is, if you have a weakness out there, they will find that guy, and it's often in coverage. They mean when they're talking about the linebacker who can't really cover, or or your cornerback who is just way below your other star cornerback. But anyway, it's an interesting point you're making about the linebacker getting mentally and physically exhausted at the same time.
It's tough, and yeah, on your point there about weakness, I thought exactly of that. The Lions-Bucks game this week, where Hill was playing 80% the snaps for the Bucks instead of Devin White. And the first time I saw Devin White on the field, and I don't know this was his coverage, but the first time I saw him on the field was a Lions touchdown in the back of the end zone where he was covering the middle of the field. As soon as he was on the field, the Lions were entirely going to roughly just in behind him.
Yeah. I even wonder if some of that comes up at the line of scrimmage. They probably have to probably call that stuff into the huddle because it's the offensive coordinator is going to be in the best position to see that kind of thing, or some sort of quality control coach who's watching the other team's personnel get put on the field. But I would think also a quarterback sometimes, if Tom Brady wears on his wristband, find 20 on every play, there's no reason why you can't find Devin White's number.
Yeah.
So, All right, let's move on. Talk a little bit about Lamar here. This was one of the most extreme blitz-heavy games that I've ever observed as a football analyst. 21 of 25 dropbacks that Lamar had, and that does not include his scrambles, the ones that resulted in a pass or sack. 21 of 25 were 5+ rushing. Never seen anything like it, 84%.
And I found it a little bit strange as well, because am I not right in saying that Lamar's actually this season been better against the blitz than he has in previous seasons?
I have heard that, and I haven't really tracked it closely. It's in the articles. It's not been something I've looked at week after week because not a lot of teams go after Lamar with 5 very often. They sometimes come with a delayed 5. That's something I know Cleveland and Cincinnati bring occasionally, but a lot of teams go for a high percentage of the game.
Yeah.
Anyway, Lamar was 14 of 18 on those throws, but only for 4.3 net yards per play with 3 sacks in there. With a 4-man rush, he was 3 of 4 for 32 yards, 8 yards per play. They never tried a 3 against him. So, and none of that. One of the things you look at Lamar's passing stats for this game, you kind of lose the impact of his scrambling, which obviously was enormous.
Yeah, huge. I tweeted this on Sunday. If a quarterback went out there and threw for 252 yards and had 4 passing touchdowns and no interceptions, we would not need to have any sort of referendum on how good he is at the quarterback position. But after that game, it's like, oh, Lamar only passed for 152 yards and the Ravens won the game. Like, this is different, and the yards all count.
Yeah, I was trying to get his scrambles together while you're talking here, but he had 4 scrambles for 48 in this. I mean, really, if you're looking at the sacks, combine those sacks with the 4 scrambles for 48, and you still get a positive yardage total on his forced not to pass plays. Okay, so you combine those. That's not particularly common. The average is probably right around 0 in the NFL. There's a lot of quarterbacks who've been negative for full years. Jackson in 2019, 5.1 yards per play when forced not to pass, that was beyond absurd, but it's pretty cool. All right, ATS, BOQ, and pressure. Let's have a little talk about this, because Lamar did not make the best of his opportunity set in this game, so it would be fairly stated. 8 times he had ample time and space, more than a 3-second pocket, or had a 3-second pocket that would have held up for that time. 32% of the time. That's a good number of ATS opportunities, but with below average results at 7.0 yards per play. Now, you kind of pull this together with what you observed about his first half time to throw, maybe.
Yeah, just even anecdotally, as I was watching the game, the whole first half, it felt like in my head I was saying, "Get the ball out, get the ball out, There didn't feel like there was rhythm there. It felt like drop back to pass, wait and see if anything comes open, wait a little bit longer, and then scramble. Whereas as the game went on, it was drop back to pass. Is anyone open? No, move. Or drop back to pass. Is anyone open? Yes, ball out. The whole thing just had so much more rhythm.
The game really reminded me a lot of the Miami game from a couple of years ago. I guess it was 21 on the Thursday night, that miserable freaking 40 cover 0 looks that they threw at him. It basically was, we're going to keep doing this until you prove you can beat it. And it took that halftime adjustment. And I'll go through this real quick. In the first half, they rushed 5, and I could include the 3s in there. The number wouldn't be much different, but they rushed 5 6 times in the first half. Lamar had 1 net yard on those plays, 2 sacks for a total of 16, 1 out of 4 for 17 yards in terms of passing. The second half, he was 5 of 5 for 63 yards with a 5+ man rush. So they did figure it out at halftime. And I think we've seen videos of Monken today approaching somebody in the crowd and saying, "I'm glad we played for 60 minutes instead of 30. Let's move on. Ball out quick. 8 times of those, also obviously 32%, 7.4 yards per play on those. That was a lot of what happened that was really good in the second half, was ball out quick. He had a couple in the first half as well, but primarily that was what was truly exceptional. And 7.4 yards per play on BOQ is good. I'd say 6 yards is about average. For a ATS, I'd want around 9 yards per play would be a typical. And for a pressure, 3 to 3.5 is maybe normal. And the Ravens defense has done even better than that in terms of holding other teams down with pressure this year. But with the ball out quickly, anything specifically about what the Ravens did you'd like to talk about?
I don't know necessarily just about this game, but anytime I think about them getting the ball out quickly, I kind of immediately think about Kurt Warner's criticisms. And I think Kurt Warner has had very fair analysis of the Ravens offense throughout the year, whereby he's been critical at points, but he's also praised the scheme. He's pretty much throughout the year praised Lamar for what he's done. But one of the things he was most critical of at various points throughout the year was like receivers not being open quickly, and schematically it's guys, they're pushing guys further down. There's no quick routes to get anyone open. And when you saw a lot of the replays in the first half, that's what I think the issue was. The receivers were not there and they weren't open. So it felt like in the second half, they were getting receivers open quicker. I think he actually had a higher average depth of target in the second half, but it felt like there was a lot more quick short passes to try and get things open there. So that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, depth of target for the game was a pretty good relationship. 6.9 average depth of target. Sorry, 6.9 completed yards and 7.6 average depth of target. He didn't throw a lot of long balls in this game. Most of the stuff that he was successful is with between 10 and 20 yards, and some of the shorter stuff as well. But I think that bears out your point pretty well. And the completion percentage over expectation coming in at 6.1%. It was the second best of the divisional round. It was something that I would have necessarily thought was true being at the game and emotionally reacting to the passes individually. I would have thought it was probably not that good.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. What else we got to say? 1.1 yards per play with pressure. 10 times they pressured him. That is a lot, 40%. And it's not a good result either at 1.1. A 3 or 3.5 is normal, I would say, certainly for Jackson. The Ravens defense, by the way, I promise you that number 2.3 yards per play they've allowed this year when they've pressured opponents. And that includes a ton of sack yards, obviously, in there, but still exceptionally good. Let's see. I think we talked about time to throw enough. We don't need to go back there. I guess maybe let's talk about the blitz was successful, obviously, this year. Kansas City's had a great pass rush this year. What do you expect from them in terms of the blitz next week?
I think it's going to be real interesting to see if they do what Houston did, at least at the start of the game, and say, we're going to do this until you can show that you can stop us. They might not need to blitz. I think almost more important than blitzing is going to be lining Chris Jones up as close to John Simpson as you can. That's the biggest mismatch that the Chiefs have on defense versus the Ravens offense, I think. So if they can cause some problems there, then they can try and spy Lamar and try and prevent those things. But they've been good on defense as well, not to the same level the Ravens have, but they have the players that can cause problems. And going back to the Kansas City or Buffalo question, that was probably the kind of like two sides of the coin. You would rather go up against Josh Allen than Mahomes, as good as Josh Allen had been this year. You'd rather go up against Mahomes as good as he's been historically because Josh Allen's rushing ability, but you would rather go up against the Bills defense because of the injuries they've had, whereas the Chiefs defense, I think, is at a higher level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly a concern with the way that Simpson has been targeted recently. And it seems like the last 6 games, teams are really figuring it out. He's had 6 consecutive games in the D/F range. As I've scored it, I'm sure PFF has been similar in terms of their aggregate over the period. Is it time to make a change? Because Ben Cleveland is there. He's played reasonably well in the time he's had.
He's the only other option, and he has played well enough that like I would be open to seeing it. The Cleveland question that always lingers in my head is, what is it that the coaches are seeing that they just don't feel comfortable with him being out there? Because it feels like he is a better option. So the coaches who have got pretty much every other decision right, there must be something that makes them think he's not the guy who can play 60 plus snaps for us a game.
Recently, Harbaugh has openly praised Simpson in a way he hadn't done in basically the last 2 years since he showed up fat after his wedding not in the 22 camp. Okay. And he basically had been the doghouse as far as I can tell that entire time. They really haven't gotten him on the field very much. When they have, it's as a 6th offensive lineman. It's as a few snaps here, a few snaps there as a backup. But he actually played as a rookie more than he had in the last 2 years combined. So and I think that's true. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I believe that to be true. That he played several games as a rookie and he didn't really see action the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. We've got him 367 as a rookie, 95 last year, and 170 including the playoffs this year.
Okay, so he's still slightly behind in those terms. I thought they might do it. I mean, obviously, the big thing with Cleveland is he's not the puller that Simpson is, but Simpson's got to hang his hat entirely on that, and it's not an area of strength for him. I mean, Simpson has some decision-making issues, I believe, in terms of picking a target that you don't see from a Morgan Moses, who's a decidedly slower player, but just much more decisive about who he's going to block when pulling.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why teams are going after Simpson, and I mean realistically, it's the only true weakness I think the Ravens have on offense right now. I think the other two like small weaknesses they have is the lack of a home run threat at running back, and they have good wide receivers. They don't have a true number one wide receiver. So those are two like smaller issues. But Simpson's the one whereby if things can break down and go wrong and you can have one play that really goes against you, that's where the most likely problem's going to occur.
Right. And, you mentioned like what could possibly be going through their minds that they don't want to try a change. I mean, Simpson's continued penalties, which are, at an absurdly high level, both in Las Vegas and now here, basically he's matched his production in both places. And I don't get it. I didn't think the Ravens picked him up, and I expected the Ravens thought, this is Las Vegas coaching. They messed him up. He's got a million excuses. We're going to cut out the excuses. We're going to put him through this Saleh grinder where we have to pretend like Saleh is going to really be our left guard to start the year. He's going to have to adjust to that. He's going to have to cut his penalties. He's going to have to face his own problems and demons and whatnot. And I don't think you can say the project has worked at this point. I think we'd have to say it's, I know we do have differences between PFF and my system in terms of how serious penalties are, but particularly the post-snap penalties, which are a hefty share of Simpsons, are very serious because they also give the defense the option to take it or not. So it's the 10 yards or the worst event if that's what they'd like to happen.
Yeah, and like according to our grading system, I think he's comfortably the Ravens' weakest offensive lineman so far this season. And the only one that I think you can say is not really playing at starter level quality. Everyone else is, to be fair, everyone else is probably above just starter level quality, but he is the guy who is kind of below that replacement level, which makes it just feels very unlikely they're going to make a change this late in the year. But there are 2-3 times a game, maybe even more, that I think everyone probably finds himself asking that question.
Yeah, it just, some of the circumstances seem very similar to 2012 when they did make the big 3-position switcheroo right before the playoffs, and I'm shocked. I'm shocked. That's not the correct word. I'm mildly surprised they have not made a change, even though, offensive line in general, PFF rates them as one of the higher graded offensive lines across the league, right? When you do your rankings articles and whatnot.
Yeah, I think at the end of the regular season, they were 5th.
Okay. All right,
I will say, I think most people when they see that think, well, that feels high, because I don't feel the Ravens offensive line has been good this year. At the risk of upsetting offensive line experts, offensive line play in the NFL as a team unit whole this year feels like it's taken a pretty comfortable step back. You still have key players being really, really good, but there aren't many really good offensive lines. So the Ravens having, 4 guys who are good enough and then 1 guy who's not, all of a sudden actually is one of the best lines in football in the landscape.
Yeah, I agree with that statement, generally speaking. I mean, I'm a little more down on Ronnie Stanley than other people because he's had a lot of penalties this year and obviously he's not been Ronnie Stanley. But I think right now, given where he was, I'm very happy with going into this next game with Kansas City with him. But the other thing I'd say is that almost every other team in the league is working with a patchwork offensive line at this point. They've got injuries, at 1 or 2 spots a lot of the time. Some teams are down 3 linemen, and they're really playing backups now this year. I mean, just played a Texans team that had Juice Scruggs at left guard. That could not have been by choice.
No, they liked Scruggs enough to take him in the 2nd round, but he was someone who we had as a guy coming into the league who was pretty raw. So not a guy that I think you desperately want to be playing a lot of snaps early on.
All right, good stuff. We'll get back to some more offensive line talk in the second half. Let's talk a little bit other scheme issues. The Ravens' backfield snaps shifted a little bit. Hill now up to 39 snaps. Obviously, wanted to use him some as a pass blocker in this game, but also as a runner. Gus down to 23 snaps. I haven't heard anything since the game about the potential for him to be injured, but he kind of looked like he's holding his arm funny when he went off the field.
There was one point early on in the game where it did look like he was injured early on. So it's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on there.
I think this was actually late. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember him returning after his arm dangling off funny. The Ravens sidelines on the other side of the field from us. And he walked off right down the 40-yard line or so. So the Ravens were on their own side of the field at the time this is happening, and he definitely looked like his arm was hanging. Now that could be a stinger, it could be just got a bruise or whatever, but hopefully there's no serious injury there because the Ravens really don't have anybody to replace him at this point.
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look just now. Yeah, so his last snap was 11:47. I thought he looked a little bit dinged up before then, but maybe I'm completely misremembering. But yeah, his last snap was 11:47 left in the fourth.
Okay. We saw Cook for 9 snaps. Of course, everybody's real happy that he got his big first run on the board, and I kind of see him as a more or less or a 1.1 for 1 or a 1.2 for 1 replacement of Gordon, who had a different set of problems and obviously fumbled the football and lost favor.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously a signing because he was a high-profile player that got a lot of attention. This was the usage of him that I expected, which was no usage really until the game was out of reach, and that's where you kind of want to use him there. Now, another week under his belt, maybe he does see a little bit more. Maybe if there is any kind of issue with Gus Edwards in terms of injury, but this, for as much fanfare as it got, has always felt like a guy that, realistically, unless something goes wrong, isn't seeing 5 touches in the game unless you have the game wrapped up in the fourth quarter.
You've probably got his snaps in front of you right now, but what I recall is he came in once for a pony backfield in the first half, and he might have been in for one other play, but he was in for once for pony backfield where he was the lead back on a fake run right that went then left to Hill as the tailback. That's what you guys have.
That's where it was. 11:05 in the second quarter. He lines up as offset fullback, fakes getting the ball goes to Hill, and he then is not back on the field until 9:39 in the fourth. Okay.
So it's good to have him out there, and it's certain things make me kind of go into an octave higher of a voice, and one of them is seeing the pony backfield, kind of thing. It's but seeing Dalvin Cook out there also was kind of interesting, and they happened to overlap and be on that same play.
Yeah.
Let's see. Hill, I have him for 5 pass blocking snaps. I saw you guys have him for 4, and you dinged him for a pressure. I did not have him for any pressures in his time. Which play was the pressure that he got charged with?
The pressure was on. I'll just look it up right now because I've got it in front of me. 25 seconds left in the first half, so that'll be
one of those sacks.
At the last, yeah, it's one of the sacks, and it's just a pressure he's been charged with. And
well, the first of those 2 sacks was an ATS sack, so I don't think that could have been him. They had
no
the ball for 3 seconds, so it had to be the S-13.
Yeah, it's the one where I think it's Desmond King's coming off in the slot, and it's kind of one of those ones that when I look at it, it's kind of like right on the borderline, because if Lamar isn't forced to drift back, then he might actually be fine. So that's where that's come in. But in general, a pretty clean game overall.
All right. Fair enough. I know it doesn't add to being a good grade, but he's been a terrific pass blocker, I've thought, for the Ravens this year, in particular down the stretch since he's been playing more with Mitchell gone.
Yeah, I'm obviously not happy that Mitchell got hurt, but I do like the fact that Hill's being appreciated for the fact that he's just a good, solid player. Not going to be a guy who's going to go lead the league in rushing or anything like that, but solid runner, solid pass blocker, does a lot of stuff you want him to do. Good special teamer when he's been there as well in the past. So good player that's getting a bit more of a prominent role, which is nice to see.
I'm loving it. And, the Ravens came into the season with 4 real speed players on this team: Flowers, Duvernay, Mitchell, and Hill. And they're early in the year, it was disturbing how much Flowers was the sole speed weapon that they were really willing to use. They have Duvernay back. And by the way, that's one of the things I want to talk about is Duvernay getting 0 snaps in this game. It was one of the minor disappointments I had, especially when you got the game won in the fourth quarter. Bring him in, put a couple things on tape for the next team to see.
I did wonder if that was maybe like a let's not risk injury? Like, is he, how all the way back is he? Do they maybe not want to put him out there when the game's won and, risk anything there?
Could be. That could be, because they're out of slots at this point. They only have the one for Andrews. Let's see. Ricard back on the field for 37 plays, and he'd had a really short game against Pittsburgh, a dozen or so plays, as I recall it, despite the fact that Mason was only in there for one play. But it's always a good sign when your fullback is out there for a lot of plays and you're trying to close out a game.
Yeah, and I think 24 were in the second half, and I think he actually had 4 or 5 that were actually true fullback snaps. My big gripe this year, as you'll know because we talked about it, is the way players are tagged position-wise means that formation-wise and personnel-wise, the Ravens, when I look it up, it actually isn't true, and I've got to actually go in and work out some numbers myself because Ricard's lined up as a tight end. But I think 37, ties the season high for him, or if not, it's pretty close to his season high in snaps. That
would have been the low average for last year.
Yes, yeah. I think it's something, though, that Todd Monken deserves a lot of credit for in terms of how he's used him. It was the one, when I looked ahead before the season at all his stops throughout college and the NFL as an offensive coordinator, he's very good at adapting to the talent he has. But I just didn't see how he was going to adapt to the talent of a fullback. And essentially how he's done it is said, no, you're actually going to play tight end. And it's just the amount of times this season that you see a good Ravens run and you go and you look at the play on tape and Ricard has some positive impact on the play. So, I know tone setter isn't really an analytics term, but I think there is something to be said for what Ricard brings in that sense.
Yeah. I hope he's a player that'll still be with the Ravens next year, but obviously they're going to be scrimping for money. And it may be a case where, he'll be in the last year of his deal and it's a few million they can save. They might try and do it, or they may go in cheap. This would be an 80-20 kind of situation. I hope it's one where Ricard is kept, particularly if this team is close to as good as they were this year. They're not going to be as good as they were this year, but if they're close, you'd like them to have Ricard.
Yeah, the interesting thing will be, so they've used Charlie Kohler a lot as a run blocker, and I do wonder next season if it is that 80-20 thing on Ricard, whereby they decide that they can save some money there. Kohler be the primary blocking tight end, and then the combination of Andrews and likely as the receiving guys.
Do you think the Ravens might go through the process again of finding that defensive lineman that they think has the good mobility to play fullback from the UDFA crowd?
It would be interesting to see if they did, because I don't know that it's something that you necessarily need in a Todd Monken offense, but it worked out well for them, and they've looked at similar things in the past. So I think they've been a team that's been willing to move players around and not be tied to where a player played in college. I mean, there was, whether or not it was anything serious, there was talk of Ricard being a interior offensive lineman at one point in the preseason. So I think that probably speaks to how highly he's regarded by the team.
That was a very interesting few days there. It really didn't last long. And you kind of knew they weren't ever really serious about it, but it was interesting to have that happen.
Yeah.
And then we never got a live fire on that. We never saw him play in a preseason game, for example. It was only at camp that they were looking at that.
Yep.
Talking about the receivers for a little bit now. Snaps were divided. Flowers 56 snaps, Bateman 44, Aguilar 32. A little bit surprising to some people that Beckham only played 20 snaps. Is an indicator of health. Where do you toss that?
I was surprised as well, because it was the two things that I felt most confident in heading into the playoffs were, one, Lamar's going to run the ball more because there's better payoff and less risk in running in the playoffs effectively. Whereas I think that, partly during the season, you don't want him to get hurt. Feel like maybe the training wheels come off and you let him run because you're less scared about it. And the other was that I thought Beckham would be heavily featured, and they targeted him early on, and I was like, here we go, this is going to be a big Odell Beckham game. But then in the second half, it felt like they went heavier in the second half, and that's where I think he just, he wasn't the fit there in that sense. But I still think if they do go on win these next two games, it just feels like at some point there's still one Odell Beckham game left.
Okay, of the next two, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
We'd love to see it, and certainly you get to the Super Bowl any way you can. But I'm in the middle on Odell Beckham, and I know a lot of people think I'm a Beckham hater, and I hated the signing at the price. Okay. And I hate, there's another component I really hate. I hate all the ridiculous over people who had, Odell getting 1,000 yards, 1,200 yards, 1,400 yards. I mean, it's so difficult to hear, that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, Odell Beckham has done some nice things for this team. And he's been an anti-hero. He's drawn a bunch of penalties. He probably has some things that have been good in terms of teaching players, although I'm really not privy to that. And I think it's easy to overstate how much players do for other players without hearing it from another player who's being taught directly. Do you agree with that statement, by the way? Do you think that there's some of that any veteran player is given credit for being a useful guy in the clubhouse to go to?
Yeah, especially when they are signed. It feels like the default thing for like, oh, this guy is going to be good for the young players at this position. And maybe it is. I'm just, I just never see it. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but like it feels like Odell, and again, I'm like you, the price at the time of signing was not something I was a massive fan of. But it does feel like he does have his finger on the pulse in terms of like the mentality and the vibes around this team. Like it feels like at the end of the game when Lamar's being interviewed and Odell comes up and he's hyping him up, like a lot of the stuff that has haunted his career in terms of opinion is this kind of diva mentality. He is not a featured receiver in Baltimore. He is, going through games where he gets a couple of targets, if that, and is still very happy to be around and is still hyping other people up. So that's the thing that I think can sometimes go unnoticed when, rather than it being frustrated that you're not receiving enough of the ball, he's actually doing his bit to keep hyping everyone up.
That's definitely positive. We saw a lot of that from Mark Ingram, who was getting the ball plenty in 2019 and was a terrific offensive leader. I'm sure you've seen this, but do you remember the old Joe Flacco and Ray Rice trying to make Joe Flacco a leader cartoon? It was like Sports Friends or something it was called.
No, I don't think I did see that.
If you have never seen that, oh man, you need to go out on YouTube and watch that. I'd almost like to watch you watch it right now, but we're not going to take 5 minutes to do it. It's absolutely hilarious. It's Ray Rice comes to Joe Flacco and tries to get Joe Flacco to be the leader of the Ravens. And the guy who's playing Joe Flacco is absolutely hilarious doing it. And Joe Flacco's first response to it, hey, that sounds like a great idea. We do need a leader. Let's get Anquan Bolden. It's really good. It's from that era. If there's anybody else who's too young to remember that, because it has been about 10 years now, it's called Sports Friends. And look for Sports Friends, Joe Flacco, Ray Rice on YouTube. One of the funniest things you'll ever watch.
I'll look it up once we get done.
All right. Isaiah Likely on an amazing run right now, 11.5 yards per target over these 7 games. I keep having to frame that up for people because no Ravens receivers ever had 11.5 yards per target over 31 target regular season or over a 25 target regular season, over a 20 target regular season. The highest ever was Andrews at 11.04 in his rookie year. It is a remarkable run that he's on right now.
Just a really, really good receiver. I don't know if this is a hot take at all, but it does feel like when Mark Andrews is healthy, the Ravens probably have 2 of the top 10 receiving tight ends in the NFL. And one of my biggest frustrations of the year is that we didn't see the 2 of them together enough. And it wouldn't surprise me if that winds up being the off-season plan. If Todd Monken doesn't wind up with a head coaching job, which I don't think he will. I think he'll still be here next year. Wouldn't really surprise me to see him build more of a 2 tight end offense next year. Yeah,
it would not surprise me either. And they need to make room for him regardless. If let's say we're not going to see a large change in scheme these next 2 weeks, which means we see some inline play from tight ends, probably from Ricard primarily, and we see Andrews and Likely back on the field. What do you think is the way that the Ravens will utilize both of them?
I tried to almost war game this out earlier, and I think what happens is I think you see Charlie Kohler's usage drop down, possibly to the point of non-existent, possibly not even being active. Ricard takes the run block and snaps there, and likely stays in the role he's in now, and Mark Andrews takes the Charlie Kohler receiving snaps. And that's not in the sense of like, I think Isaiah Likely's a better player than Mark Andrews. He's coming back off a very serious injury that I think realistically no one really expected him to be back this season. So I think you probably want him, at least in that first game back, if he is back this week, in like a limited role whereby, it's a handful of snaps. So he replaces Charlie Cole as a receiver. Ricard does as a fullback and likely just sticks with the role he's in, because if it's not broke, don't try and fix it.
You have 2 weeks off after this next game to try and get Andrews a little more healthy. And hopefully he can take even a slightly larger role. But I'm with you. I think a pitch count role and a rotational role could work. I think it's always nice to have rested players. I really always like running fresh legs into the game to go against defensive backs who have to play hard, play after play. Even when they have to play zone defense, they have to make some quick movements. They get winded. Watch for the defensive backs who have their hands on their hips. You know who's tired, and it's not it's a non-trivial number of them. It's not as hard as rushing the passer play after play, but it's definitely something where fresh legs really help. A few years ago, Houston beat SMU coming back from the death penalty in college football, 95-21. Don't know if you know some of the history of this. This game goes probably back to about 1990 now. But Andre Ware, I always say DeMarcus Ware, but DeMarcus Ware's the pass rusher. Andre Ware, I believe, was the quarterback for Houston at the time. Houston topped 1,000 yards in the game. And they kept the entire game, they kept running on fresh receivers every play against an injured group of SMU backs who were all freshmen and sophomores because they're coming back the year after a death penalty. And very unappreciated situation, but it makes you think, could it really work to be running fresh receivers on play after play?
Yeah. And the only other thing I'll say about Isaiah Likely is he gets a lot of credit for his athleticism, things like that. I think what we saw on Saturday as well was like the football IQ he has, and everyone's seen the clip now whereby the near interception, which was actually a really good play by Jalen Petrie, that he breaks away from something, could have got a pick. Wasn't a horrible decision by Lamar. I don't think it was a really good play by him, and it just slipped through his hands. But Likely after that play just gave him a signal of like a little bit higher next time, and then that's when they did the fake QB sweep, toss it up there and let him win it. And again, to that play as well, when we talk about Lamar Jackson in the running game and the impact that has, being a defensive back, and you can see it on that play if you watch it on the All-22, the defensive back who's trying to cover Isaiah Likely has to have a couple of glances at the sweep by Lamar Jackson. So just the threat that he can run the ball and that you might have to break and try and make a tackle towards the goal line, just that little bit of mental exhaustion, then the ball comes up and Isaiah Likely's just able to go and win it. So really nice play all around.
Yeah, frustrating. All they can do is kind of throw their hands up after a play like that, and you certainly see emoting from that Texans defense. Gordon, such a pleasure to talk football with you for an hour, and we got another hour to go, we hope. Tell folks where they can find your work online or talk to you if they have a football question or a question about PFF. Yeah,
you'll find me Twitter, X as it's known these days, PFF_Gordon, and you'll find anything I'm writing on PFF.com.
One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. If you've got a question about how PFF scored something, most of the time he'll answer it for you. I've never had any problem with that, and I always direct people to him because he's such a good guy to talk to about that. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. We got a 2-week period coming off, or maybe longer than that, unfortunately, but it could be 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. If you have Super Bowl content, hit me up quickly. I'll try and get you scheduled. If you have content for the off season, even stuff that has multiple episodes to it, hit me up with that. If you have ideas for episodes where you don't want to do it, but you think I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, toss those my way too. I'll try and find somebody who wants to talk about it, even if you're a little bit camera shy or a little bit microphone shy, and that's fine. Gordon, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you very much.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.